Before you give up on her, take a breath and ask yourself, are you really being rejected, or are you simply facing resistance that you don't yet understand? There's a critical difference between the two. Rejection is final. It's a closed door. But resistance, more often than not, is fear in disguise. It's guardedness. It's unresolved history showing up in the present. And if you misread it, you'll walk away from someone who wasn't pushing you away. They were waiting to see if you'd stay. See, a lot of men give up too quickly, not because they're weak, but because they're tired. Tired of mixed signals. Tired of feeling like they're not enough. Tired of emotional walls that don't seem to move. But what they don't realize is that sometimes those walls aren't there to keep you out. They're there because no one else has proven safe enough to be let in. And while it's not your job to save anyone, it is your responsibility to make sure you're not abandoning something worth fighting for simply because it didn't look easy. She may be distant, cold, or confusing, and you might take that personally. You might think, she doesn't want me, she doesn't value me, she's not serious. But often she's just scared. Scared of getting hurt again, scared of trusting someone who might not stay, scared of opening up and losing herself. That fear won't always show up in gentle ways. Sometimes it comes through attitude, avoidance, or even silence. But if your first instinct is to run the moment things get difficult, then maybe it's not her fear that's the problem. It's your inability to face discomfort. The man who has emotional maturity doesn't just react, he observes. He watches what's beneath the surface. He doesn't chase or beg, but he doesn't walk away at the first sign of resistance either. He holds steady. Because sometimes the only way to show someone you're different is by not flinching when they test you. And yes, women test, but not always because they want to manipulate you. Sometimes it's their subconscious way of asking, can you handle all of me? Not just the smiles, but the storms too? Now, this isn't a free pass to accept disrespect. That's not what I'm saying. There's a difference between emotional resistance and emotional immaturity. If she's constantly hurting you, crossing boundaries, or refusing to grow, then yes, you have every right to walk away. But before you do, ask yourself this: did I see her clearly? Did I respond with strength, or did I react out of fear? Did I lead the emotional frame, or did I abandon it the moment things got hard? The truth is, we often misjudge others based on how they respond under pressure without considering what pressure they've lived through. Maybe she's never seen a man hold his ground without becoming cold. Maybe she's never felt emotionally safe in a relationship. Maybe she's used to men leaving when she stops performing. If you're going to leave, let it be because you saw her clearly and realized it wasn't right, not because you misunderstood her silence for apathy. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is pause, not react, not lecture, not threaten to walk, just be still. In that stillness, you'll get answers, not from her words, but from your own clarity. You'll begin to see whether her walls are temporary or permanent, whether there's something sacred beneath them or just more chaos. And you'll act from wisdom, not emotion. That's how real men move. They don't just talk about emotional leadership, they embody it. They know when to stay and they know when to go. But they never quit prematurely. They never let ego make that decision because they understand something most people miss. Relationships are rarely broken by one big moment. They're usually lost in the small misunderstandings that pile up day after day because no one stopped long enough to ask what was really going on underneath. So before you give up on her, ask yourself, am I walking away from her, or am I walking away from my own discomfort? Because the woman you're about to leave might not be the wrong one. She might just be waiting to see if you'll stay long enough to understand her silence. And that answer will never come if you're too quick to leave. There's a moment in every relationship when things start to feel like a test. Tensions rise, communication fades, and emotion takes over logic. That's the point where most men slip. They react instead of lead. But if you really want to know the difference between a boy and a man in that moment, it's this: boys match her emotions, men master their own. When she gets emotional, cold, passive-aggressive, or uncertain, it's not your job to meet her in that chaos. It's your responsibility to remain grounded, calm, and composed, not just for her, but for yourself. Because leadership in a relationship doesn't mean control. It means stability. It means you're not easily moved by moods. You don't take her fluctuations personally. You don't spiral just because she pulled back. And more importantly, you don't turn cold just because she did. Responding with leadership means being able to hold the emotional frame of the relationship without needing to dominate it. It's about guiding the dynamic from your center, not reacting from your wound. Most men make the mistake of getting emotionally pulled into the storm. She's upset, so he gets upset. She withdraws, so he chases. She criticizes, so he defends. And in doing that, he hands over the leadership. He lets the emotions of the moment dictate the direction of the relationship. But real masculine energy doesn't bend under pressure. It holds. It listens without losing its ground. It stays firm without becoming rigid. It recognizes that chaos is not always a call to action. It's sometimes a test of patience. When she's spiraling or shutting down, she's not always looking for solutions. Often she's watching to see how you handle yourself. Are you a man who stays calm when things aren't perfect? Can you bring peace when she brings tension? Can you remain emotionally regulated when everything around you feels unstable? That's what makes her feel safe. Not your words, not your promises, but your energy, your stillness in the middle of her storm. There will be moments where your pride wants to respond, where your ego wants to correct her, argue with her, put her in her place. But if you take that route, you lose more than the argument. You lose her respect, because while she may not always be right, she's paying attention to how you handle being wronged, or at least feeling wronged. That's what separates emotional reactivity from emotional leadership. Responding with leadership also means not needing constant validation. You don't need her to always agree with you, affirm you, or reassure you, because your sense of self isn't dependent on her mood. It's rooted in who you are, with or without her. That kind of man brings more than conversation to the table. He brings presence. And presence doesn't shout, it doesn't rush, it doesn't panic. It simply stands. Now, this doesn't mean you suppress how you feel. Emotional maturity isn't about shutting down your own truth. It's about expressing it without chaos, without weaponizing your silence, without turning vulnerability into a performance. A real leader speaks with clarity, not intensity. He says what needs to be said, not to dominate, but to direct. The most attractive trait you can carry in any relationship is emotional discipline. Because when she sees that you don't lose yourself in her reactions, she starts to trust you on a deeper level. Trust isn't built through grand gestures, it's built through consistency. One of the clearest signs that you're losing your grip in a relationship is when you find yourself constantly explaining who you are, what you meant, and why you did what you did. It becomes a cycle. Something happens, she reacts, and you rush in to justify, to calm her, to make her understand. But the more you do that, the more you start abandoning yourself in the process. Because here's the hard truth. When you're always explaining yourself, you're no longer leading, you're negotiating your worth. A man who knows who he is doesn't need to be understood by everyone. He doesn't need constant validation or approval. He lets his actions speak, his boundaries stand, and his energy carry the message. If a woman doesn't understand your intention after you've lived it consistently, maybe it's not your communication that's the problem. It's that she doesn't want to see you clearly. And in that case, no amount of explaining will ever be enough. The moment you feel the need to defend your masculinity, your decisions, or your emotional boundaries, you've already surrendered something sacred, your inner frame. And once that happens, you're no longer creating the dynamic, you're reacting to it. You're no longer holding the emotional space, you're filling the gaps she left open. You're not leading, you're chasing emotional permission to just be who you are. This happens in subtle ways. She questions your tone, and instead of calmly reaffirming your intention, you start explaining what you meant, why you said it, how she misread it, and how you didn't mean to upset her. She pulls away, and you rush to close the distance with reassurance and reasons. She throws out emotional bait, and you bite every time, hooked by the need to be understood instead of grounded in your own clarity. But leadership, real leadership, doesn't explain itself. It just is. It doesn't scream to be acknowledged. It remains solid, even when misunderstood. And that's what a woman ultimately respects. Not your ability to justify every word, but your ability to stay centered when she's emotional, confused, or trying to pull you into a storm of overanalysis. It's easy to confuse love with emotional submission. We think if we just explain better, communicate more, or try harder to be understood, things will get better. But in reality, every time you explain what should already be obvious, you chip away at the authority of your presence. You become smaller in her eyes, not because you're weak, but because you're putting your clarity up for negotiation. Masculine energy doesn't beg for understanding. It simply lives its truth. If you've communicated your values, your intentions, and your expectations clearly, that's enough. If she's still unsure, confused, or constantly second-guessing you, then she's not looking for answers. She's looking for control. And your job is not to give her more control over your identity. Your job is to remain the author of your own narrative. There's a quiet power in restraint, in letting your silence speak when you know your heart is clean, in refusing to enter conversations designed not to build connection, but to provoke insecurity. You don't owe your peace to someone who constantly disrupts it. You don't owe explanations to someone who's already decided not to hear you. A healthy relationship doesn't require constant justification. It requires mutual understanding. It's not about talking your way into respect. It's about embodying the kind of presence that commands it. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is stop explaining and simply start living your standards. The moment you return to your center, the dynamic shifts. You stop asking for her permission to be yourself. You stop waiting for her to approve your choices. And you start showing up not as a man who needs to be understood, but as a man who's already aligned with his values, with or without her agreement. That's not indifference, that's clarity. And clarity is magnetic. When a man leads with grounded presence, instead of constant explanation, he doesn't have to demand respect. It finds him. So before you give up on her, before you feel the urge to plead your case once again, ask yourself this: am I trying to be heard, or have I already spoken enough? Because the man who holds the frame never needs to explain the frame, he lives it. And that's more powerful than any words you could ever say. Sometimes what feels like conflict in a relationship is actually something more subtle. It's not hatred, it's not anger, it's not even rejection. It's a test. A quiet, unspoken question she's asking without using a single word. Can I trust your strength? You see, women don't always test you to be difficult. They test to feel safe. Not safe in the physical sense, but emotionally. Safe to be vulnerable, safe to be feminine, safe to relax. And that kind of safety doesn't come from flowers, gifts, or romantic words. It comes from your emotional steadiness when the ground starts to shake. Her tests are often misunderstood by men. When she gets sarcastic or emotionally reactive or throws a small jab your way, it's easy to see that as disrespect. But it's not always meant to hurt you. It's not always meant to push you away. In fact, sometimes she's subconsciously drawing closer, trying to find out if you'll stay solid when she gets messy, if you'll still see her clearly when she's not showing her best side, if you'll lead emotionally when she's unsure. This is why your reaction matters more than you think. When you get defensive, retaliate, or try to teach her a lesson, You fail the test, not because she wants you to be passive, but because she wants you to lead, not through control, not through aggression, but through groundedness, through presence, through the ability to witness her without flinching. Doesn't mean tolerating abuse. It means knowing the difference between a cry for leadership and a sign of disrespect. That's a distinction wise men learn to make. Let's say she throws an emotional curveball. She questions your motives, she tries to guilt you, or maybe she's just cold and distant for no obvious reason. That's where most men panic. They feel the need to fix it immediately, to get her to talk, to demand clarity. But the man who really understands feminine psychology knows this isn't the moment for words. It's the moment for stillness, for holding your emotional posture, for not letting her emotional chaos pull you off center. Because here's what happens when you stay calm in the middle of that storm. She sees something rare. She sees a man who doesn't need her approval to feel confident. A man who doesn't fall apart because she's having a hard day. A man who won't abandon her emotionally just because she's not being soft and affectionate every minute. And ironically, that's when she softens. That's when she starts to feel safe enough to put the walls down. Because she knows you're not going anywhere just because she got complicated. Women don't always say what they feel, but they always remember how you made them feel. If you make her feel like she has to be perfect for you to stay, she won't trust you. But if you can stand still when she's testing you, when she's not making it easy, when she's being cold or withdrawn, she starts to believe that maybe this is different. Maybe you're not like the others who got intimidated by her emotional range. That's why the strongest men are not the loudest. They're the most centered. They don't try to control her, they just control themselves. They don't need to match her energy. They stay rooted in their own. And that gives her space to settle into hers. When she tests you, she's not trying to dominate you. She's trying to feel your depth. Not your logic, not your arguments, not your explanations. There's a kind of strength that doesn't get talked about enough. Not the loud, dominant kind. Not the type that wins arguments or takes control of the room. I'm talking about the kind of strength that allows you to walk away, not out of anger, not out of ego, but from a place of deep clarity. Because there comes a time when staying becomes an act of self-betrayal. And if you've done everything you could, led with patience, held your ground, stayed emotionally present, and it's still not working, then the strongest move isn't to fight harder. It's to step back with dignity. Walking away is not quitting. It's choosing yourself when the dynamic becomes one-sided. It's saying, I showed up with everything I had, my consistency, my emotional steadiness, my maturity, and if that's not enough, I won't beg to be seen. That decision isn't made from bitterness. It's made from wisdom. You realize that love isn't just about how much you can give, it's also about what's being received. If you keep pouring into something that has no space to receive you, eventually you'll feel empty. And emptiness in a relationship isn't caused by lack of love. It's caused by the absence of emotional return. You can't carry both your heart and hers forever. At some point, if she doesn't meet you halfway, not just in words, but in energy, effort, and truth, you'll have to decide, is this love or is this survival? Because love isn't supposed to feel like you're constantly proving your worth. It's not supposed to feel like walking on emotional eggshells, waiting for the next shutdown or withdrawal. And yet so many men stay, not because they're weak, but because they believe that patience will fix what partnership is meant to support. But patience alone isn't leadership. Boundaries are. You see, a woman who truly respects you doesn't just want your presence, she values your peace. She wants you to be yourself, not her emotional caretaker. She wants your strength, yes, but not at the expense of your sanity. And if she can't meet you with honesty, with softness, with any effort toward mutual growth, then your decision to walk away isn't abandonment, it's self-respect. And this is where most men hesitate. They've been conditioned to think that leaving is failure, that if they could just be more patient, more understanding, more emotionally available, she'll come around. But love is not a reward for endurance. It's a reflection of mutual alignment. If she's not willing to meet you in that space, then staying becomes a slow erosion of your own masculine core. You begin to second guess your instincts. You become overly accommodating. You suppress your truth just to keep the peace. And that's not love. That's codependency dressed up as devotion. You've probably already felt it, haven't you? That inner knowing. That quiet truth that says, this isn't growing anymore. Maybe you've ignored it, hoping for a shift. Maybe you've held on because the highs were so good, and you keep believing those highs will return. But relationships aren't built on moments, they're built on patterns. And if the pattern is imbalance, distance, inconsistency, or emotional punishment, then no matter how much you give, it will never be enough, because the issue isn't what you're doing, it's what she's refusing to do. This doesn't mean she's a bad person. It doesn't mean you have to demonize her or carry resentment. It just means she's not your person. Or maybe she was, but only for a chapter. Not every connection is meant to last forever. Some are meant to teach you something powerful, how to stand firm in who you are, even when it hurts. How to know when loving someone else has started costing you love for yourself. The most masculine thing you can do isn't chasing what won't choose you. It's standing in your power and saying, I deserve reciprocity. Not perfection, not constant agreement, but effort, honesty, presence. Because real love is a mirror. It reflects what you bring. And if what's being reflected back is confusion, coldness, or emotional manipulation, then the wisest thing you can do is close that chapter, not with bitterness, but with strength. So before you give up on her, ask yourself one final question. Is there anything left to lead? Have you done your part with honor, with clarity, and with patience? If the answer is yes, and the dynamic still drains you, then it's time, not to run, not to punish, but to rise. Sometimes the smartest way to protect your peace is to walk away from anything that keeps costing you your power. There's a certain kind of quiet that carries more power than any speech, a silence that doesn't come from retreat, but from mastery. It's when we fight it that we tend to run from it, praying that if we do, we find the silence that comes from retreat, but from mastery. And in the final stages of a struggling relationship, this is often the most overlooked tool a man has, not to withdraw in resentment, not to avoid responsibility, but to consciously choose silence as a way to reclaim presence. Because when things feel like they're unraveling, when nothing you say is being heard, and every conversation turns into a loop of blame, defense, or emotional chaos, your words become noise. And the smartest move, the one that shifts everything, is to stop explaining and start embodying. When she no longer respects your voice, let her meet your silence. Not the cold kind, but the grounded kind. The kind that doesn't punish her, it stabilizes you. Because the more you try to fix it through words, when her heart is already closed, the more dignity you lose. You become a man chasing resolution instead of holding vision. And women may resist a man who walks away, but they lose all attraction for a man who abandons himself just to be tolerated. This silence isn't passive, it's full of strength. You're not ignoring her. You're no longer engaging in a dynamic that drains your masculinity. You've said what needed to be said. You've shown up with your values, your intention, your clarity, and now, instead of repeating yourself or pleading to be understood, you let your stillness speak. Because sometimes the most commanding message you can send is the one you don't deliver out loud. That silence becomes your reset. You stop reacting, you stop feeding the emotional volatility, you stop negotiating your truth. And in that stillness, something powerful happens. You remember who you are. You remember the man you were before you got lost in trying to fix her feelings, before you confused peacekeeping with leadership. You come home to your frame. And ironically, that's when everything shifts, because your energy becomes rooted again. You're no longer on edge waiting for her next emotional swing or approval. You've taken yourself off her roller coaster. And she feels that. Whether she admits it or not, she feels it. When your emotional dependence on her ends, when your happiness no longer hinges on how she's feeling that day, when you stop trying to prove you're enough and start living like you are, it doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop leaking power. This kind of presence invites a different kind of response. Sometimes she softens, sometimes she comes forward, and sometimes she pulls away completely. But either way, your energy has shifted.